We'll start off with the opening prayer. Derek Franklin in Shia. Kia onion stone na kaitana pashes chin Twitchini a dashe nana okay a dashanala takuta the nensla lay bahas atem ada shigando ada shiaho a kadeya tabugaho zande Department of the Net Education a banashnish Office of the Net Accountability do compliance day them a banashnish Education Program Manager a Jananishita Ako, I see here had the Shiro that find us okay. The Bayade Tigi ya Halate Au Ulthaigi Nujunago Bayade Tito Halate Au State on Nil Josla Slashi Oyo Ulthagi the Bikea Baka Oyo Bitchin down Stegi Halate Au State on Nil Ebin Nakwan the Sikhe. Do it's the reason why we're here. So oil the neck at yes oil shipland that sadiki to skito penashni opening na belegani getcha yashket all day. Kunda yodis the neck at do lata shumado shumapacha yashke doshland lata the neck at chip yashke oko a ashona ban stuff case so without further ado, we want to give you the opportunity to voice your concerns. Halate alban sidal case the bayade tigi. So we want to make sure that we give you the opportunity to voice your concerns. So we're going to start off with the presentations, but I want to go over the presentation. Why does Navajo Nation propose to transfer the BIE to the Department of Education? What is Public Law 93-638? There needs to be an understanding of what that is. Number 3 is who and what will be impacted. And then how long will this process take? And then what other stakeholders have we met with or have been informed of this project? Those are the items that we will be talking about, and then we'll ask for your comments. And the comments are on a volunteer basis. So these are the questions that were asked of us from various meetings that we had with school boards, with the Nepal School Board Association, HESI, and Navajo Nation Board of Education. So we'll begin with the presentation as I identified. So I want to turn the mic over to Dr. Wendy Greyeyes, who is the lead consultant. She is not a DOTI employee. She is a consultant that we hired to assist us in this project under the Tribal Education Department grant that the Navajo Nation received. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Dr. Greyeyes.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin. I just want to thank Dcollege, President Greg Bigman and President Monty Russell for helping to organize this event, and your staff, Benita, and your IT folks who helped get this room situated for us. So far we think this is probably one of the best locations for this event. We've been kind of having to pull all this information together and pull the tables and setting up chairs and everything. So this was probably the easiest location to actually set this up. She twenty nishle do 20 bashes chin is a sana dasha che do 200 dasha nave, and I'm originally from Torresnesha, Kenta, Arizona. I currently, although I'm a consultant for this grant, I formerly used to work for Department of Education, and I formerly used to work for the Bureau of Indian Education, and I formerly used to work for the Arizona Governor and the Arizona Department of Education. And all my roles have always been at the policy level, and now as I move forward in my own work, I'm now a professor at University of New Mexico, dealing with a lot of these concerns related to Native nation building. And so a lot of the work that we pull together is really thinking about what type of Navajo education system can we create for the future. If you guys get that newsletter, we did a historical overview of the past. And when we talk about this Public Law 93-638, we're talking about an idea that started back in 1970. You also see the quote there from Dylan Platero, who actually imagined a new vision of Navajo education to build the capacity of Department in Education. And that's really what we're talking about today. You know, in this PowerPoint, we put these into narratives here, as you can see. But what we were told in our public hearings, and so far this is our 5th and final one. We started with Window Rock, we went to Tuba City, we went to Crown Point, and last night we were at Shiprock. So we're ending today with Tseli. But one thing that we've learned is that our Navajo Nation is really changing. When we talk about trying to create a system, we are concerned a lot about how our students are getting their education through the Bureau of Indian Education. And as many of you guys may know, there's 5 types of school systems in operation in the Navajo Nation. Bureau of Indian Education funds 2 types, tribally controlled and Bureau-operated schools. So this data set that we're looking at examines the performance of students from K through 12. The summary of all these slides are in your PowerPoint that looks like this. But what this shows is that throughout time, we see that these are the student performance and what they call their reading lexile scores. What that means is that students have to be reading at a certain level. And when we look at the level that they should be reading at, these green ones mean what the students should be reading at that grade level. You know, and when we talk about the academic achievement gap, you know, this is actually that gap. So you can see that systematically, as students go through each grade, they aren't reading at grade level. And obviously we have a lot of, you know, outstanding scholars and students who actually push the average, but this is the average of the performance of those students for Navajo District. And so, you know, we have to think about the preparation and how are we adequately preparing our kids for college. So we also looked at another data point. We looked at the Navajo Nation scholarship. How much money do they spend towards scholarship and to reteach mathematics and English? So millions of dollars just for students get funneled into reteaching mathematics, reteaching English. So we're reteaching our students how to do math, how to read, to be prepared for college responsibilities, and that's almost about 3,600 courses annually. That's almost $1 million each year that gets funneled into Navajo Nation. So who's paying for the price of education, of not adequately preparing our students? It's the Navajo Nation. So when you think about the Navajo Nation trying to build its capacity, they generally look to Department of Education to be that entity to try to find that solution, to resolve those issues that impact the communities. But we also look towards our tribal leaders. When we selected and voted for Jonathan Nez, when we voted for our tribal council delegates, when we voted for our Navajo Nation Board of Education members, when we voted for our school board members, something that they encounter is depicted in this map. And I really love this map because it shows all the jurisdictional boundaries that impact Navajo Nation. So when you have someone come in who's empowered to make educational education their priority, majority of times they're told no. You can't because this is the jurisdiction of the public school. No, this is the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Indian Education, ADD. No, this is the jurisdiction of the tribally controlled schools. So when we talk about a new education system, you know, our leaders, they run into this wall of these jurisdictional boundaries. But when we also talk about our parents who want to give our students the best education, this is what they encounter too. That, you know, moving and maneuvering through those 5 different districts, or 5 different school types. And in this mapping of all the different school systems, we're seeing school districts which are bounded in these colored blocks. We have agency boundaries, we have chapter boundaries, which define the parameters of our school boards. And even with Dodi, they have to meet the demands of this entire Navajo Nation. We have over 140 different schools. We have 279 school board members just for BIE funded schools. And then we have 14 school boards for the different types of school systems. Our educational system is really big, it's really confusing, and this is one of the reasons why we're pushing this agenda forward to help us build a new education system that's driven by Department of Education, because they are the entity defined by Title 10 to manage the responsibilities of our education structure. We also need to be realistic about how we're educating our Navajo people. A majority of our Navajo people don't get bachelor's degrees or our graduate or professional degrees. Majority of our people have at least a high school education or less. So when we're building this infrastructure and moving forward, we have to look at the data as an entity that actually promotes and defines how we're creating a system that doesn't match the needs of our community. Why aren't our people getting college degrees? Why aren't they getting professional degrees? During this whole public hearing, I mean, sometimes, you know, people have had, you know, some thoughts about professional degrees and, you know, the value of them. They are very valuable because, you know, as we think about some of the programs and the initiatives out there, we need teachers who have these types of degrees. We need more attorneys, and tomorrow there's a seminar occurring on building a law school here at Dcollege. We need more attorneys because as we look back even on this, our education system is being defined by legal minds, by attorneys. And one of the biggest questions I have is how much do tribally controlled schools invest in attorney fees? So there's still an outstanding question there. But the other thing that we kind of got beat up on as well through these public hearings is Head Start. And I think this slide is very pertinent to understanding the reality of our people. In 1868, there was approximately 9,000 tribal members. And these were just basic Indian agent counts. But as time has gone on, it wasn't until the 1970s that the US Census actually started to take the count of Navajo people more seriously. This is not a count of all the Navajos throughout the United States. This is just the count on our reservation. In 2000, we had 175,000, and we see that exponential growth. But in 2010, that's when you see the first decline. What does that mean? It means that our people are really moving off the reservation. That Head Start, one of the biggest reasons why they get dinged all the time is because they have low student enrollment. They also struggle with finding early education teachers who can manage the responsibilities of teaching students and have the qualifications. But I know this issue is also pertinent because growing up in Kienta at Monument Valley High School, the closure of the coal mine, Lamiel Atson, a former superintendent from Shanto Preparatory School, reported as a new superintendent of Monument Valley, they lost 300 students. So when we talk about the reality of our education system, we're not creating one that is matching the changes in our demographics. But all we've really done is create a system that has more jurisdictional boundaries. Whose authority is it to manage this kid? Whose authority is it to hire this kid? I mean, those are sometimes the questions that get promulgated to DOTI to even clarify. Sometimes they have to be the middleman to figure out some of these issues. But the other part of this story is the changing and decline in our chapters. In this chart, you'll see all 110 chapters. Obviously, we tried to squeeze it all in. But Steamboat chapter, Danahoto chapter, Mini Farms, Nashchiri, Red Lake, they've had a drop in their population. This is a comparison between 2009 and 2017. So when we talk about the changing demographics of our communities, the ones that did have increased were Chinle chapter, Theru, Pinedale, but not by very much. So we need a new structure that actually resolves some of those dilemmas. So in this first write-up of these issues, we have to think about what does the data say? The other part of this is that, you know, being Navajo, not speaking Navajo, you know, we have to also really consider that, you know, we all care about the Navajo language, but the problem is that it's still on a decline in terms of our speakers. So this is data from the American Community Survey that also shows the number of those that speak only English, and those that speak another language. So as you can see that our elderly are kind of declining, but there's also, you know, a more increase of the English language speakers, because when you look at the 5 to 17, we are really losing out on a lot of these primarily Navajo spoken at home initiative. And then our economics. When we talk about creating a new class of Navajo education, you know, we push a lot of technology jobs, we push a lot of service jobs, tourism, but the reality is that the government actually is the largest employer of Navajo people. And this is what the data shows here. Educational services, healthcare, and social assistance. So even though we imagine this really wonderful and beautiful, and I remember Rexley Jim once saying, let's make Navajo the next Las Vegas, let's make Navajo the next Paris, you know, and when you think about trying to build that, you think about these structures and how and who our biggest employers are. You know, we have to rethink how are we building our economy to meet the demands for a globalized, competitive individuals, because most of our people are leaving the reservation. So when we're proposing this 638 plan, you know, this is what we're operating, understanding all these data points, understanding the reality of our Navajo people. We're wanting DOTI to lead the charge because that's what Title 10 has authorized them to do, to be. But what is the Public Law 93-638? When this law was passed in 1975, it actually had a lot of our own experiences as Navajo people built into that. In 1969, when the Rough Rock Demonstration School was established, this was that opportunity where tribes were beginning to take over their own educational systems. And once the Rough Rock Demonstration School started to kind of create a ripple throughout other tribal communities, it started to plant the seeds and ideas for other tribes to actually push this initiative through to Congress. And Dylan Platero was one of the early individuals who helped design and develop this. This is Dylan Platero, one of our own, who helped testify at Congress to help this law pass in 1975. And all of our earlier schools, before they became Public Law 10297, which is tribally controlled, they were Public Law 93-638 schools. But Public Law 10297 modified that in 1988, and that's what a lot of our schools are right now, half our school systems. But this idea of 93-638 is really an old law. And when we talk about Navajo Nation, they already do a lot of these programs. They've got about 19 programs that actually have taken full control of their federal programs. Indian Health Services, Public Safety, Transportation, Scholarship, etc. And I know throughout this whole conversation, people are going to be like, well, it's not the best system. Yeah, but the challenge here is that the tribes are still building their capacity to manage all of these responsibilities, but they're still doing a heck of a better job than the federal government did, because they're more invested in our future, because they are Navajo people who are managing these programs. So what we're pursuing is not unknown as well. We're saying we want to take over Navajo District Bureau of Indian Education at the ADD level, which is in Window Rock. Have other tribes tried to do the same thing in their tribal communities? So what we also pulled together is an analysis of other tribes that have also taken on some level of this type of responsibility, and that's Rosebud Sioux, Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, Sisseton Wahpeton, Lower Brule Sioux, and Crow Creek Sioux. Working at BIE, I had the privilege of actually working on the other side to understand how those contracts were developed, how they put together their resolutions, their budget, their scope of work to initiate these initiatives. But I mean, the first thing we're going to point out is there are only 1 or 2 schools, 1 or 2 staff. That's not the story. The story is that this pathway has already been developed and established through the Bureau of Indian Education. So they already have an understanding of how to manage these. Mississippi Choctaw has also done the same, but eventually, after they did the 93-638 contracting, they reverted to the Public Law 100-297. But there are stories out there to demonstrate that this is already happening. So who and what will be impacted? So one of the biggest questions that we get asked is, well, what is Bureau of Indian Education? We had a whole report, a 40-page report, and folks were telling us, can we put that into a diagram? And so this was our effort to do this. So these are the current federal lines of authority to operate BIE only on the Navajo Nation. BIE operates in 64 tribal nations. We're one of those tribes. So we're going to go from the top. U.S. Department of Education in Washington, D.C. Their major responsibility and their oversight is primarily the funding and compliance oversight of BIE. U.S. Department of Interior is the direct operators of BIE. All these relationships that I'm describing really capture the essence of what we're going to be going to negotiate with the federal government. When we build our negotiation team, this is what we're going to ask them or tell them to actually transfer those responsibilities over. U.S. Department of Interior oversees 183 BIE funded schools. So when we look at BIE in Washington, D.C., if we thought about this just in funding terms, U.S. Department of Interior gives 75% of funding to BIE, and U.S. Department of Education gives about 25%. So how does this trickle down to the Navajo Nation? Navajo District Associate Deputy Director's Office, which is in Window Rock. What's really important about this part of the analysis is that this is what we're talking about when we say we're going to transfer BIE over to the Navajo Nation Department of Education. This is only the administrative oversight and the responsibility there. We also have 5 education resource centers that they oversee, which is in Window Rock, Tuba City, Chinle, Crown Point, and Shiprock. So I know a few tribally controlled schools are here. I know Bureau operated schools are not permitted to attend these meetings, but we have tribally controlled schools with a black roof. And these generally are those schools that have the elected school board members. Those elected school board members have full decision-making authority over their schools, over their HR, their finance, their governance, their facilities, their maintenance and operations. So, you know, in terms of thinking about the full gamut of actually controlling schools, the school board members here manage a lot of these responsibilities. And right now, across all 66 schools, we have a very, a large number of school board members, of 279 school board members that oversee either the tribally controlled or the bureau operated. The difference of a bureau operated school is that they don't have full authority over the decision making of their school. Their role has generally been isolated and marginalized to a level called advising only. So this whole map is really helping you understand and get a synthesis of all the different responsibilities and roles for each of those entities. And there's these are up here, or if you don't have the PowerPoint, it's over there. So what is this process? To begin transferring that administrative oversight to the Navajo Nation. What does that mean when you come and talk about BIE? So this is that office that we saw earlier. There's 2 additional roles that they play, and one is school operations and one safety and facilities. And this translates to about 56 total staff. Let me be clear, none of these FTEs are teachers. So these are education program administrators, program analysts, facilities and maintenance individuals, people who do a lot of the education specialist work. These are the team that operates and manages and provides technical assistance to the schools. So in order to transfer all 56 FTEs, which are the employees, to Bureau of Indian Education, and it's really not the employees, we're more interested in their functions and the authority that they have. This is our Navajo Nation government that oversees the responsibilities of education for Navajo. We have the Navajo Nation Council. And as you guys know, in our governing system, we have what they call a 3-branch system. Our legislative arm makes the laws. Our executive arm implements the law. Our judicial arm interprets the law. So this one arm, the Navajo Nation Council and the Health, Education, Human Services entity, they're the arm that creates the law. The entity that actually creates the policies and procedures, which means they take the law and they actually put the responsibilities of which division, which department, which entity, what their responsibilities are, what's their measurable outcomes, so that it becomes more entrenched. They define those policies and procedures for that law. Department of Education was established in 1970, and they serve as the implementation arm for the Navajo Nation, and they're responsible for all these functions that we'll be describing, and eventually we hope when we do the BIE transfer, they become the entity to deploy all the responsibilities from the BIE. We also recognize the Dcollege School Board Association. This entity, under Title 10, which is the tribal code that reflects on our education system, clarifies that the Dcollege primary responsibility in terms of working with departments in education, Navajo Nation Board of Education, and Health, Education, Human Services Committee is that they do a lot of advisement, they provide a lot of recommendations, and these 3 entities, including the President's Office, John Nez, they're the ones who asked us to be here to actually do these public hearings as well. So what does Department of Education look like right now? Right now, we've already covered the oversight, but Department of Education Superintendent's Office is dealing with a lot of the leadership over budget, over policy, ensuring that those get deployed. Right now, the acting superintendent is Dr. Timothy Benali. And then we have 5 offices. The reason why we color-coded these is because we wanted to show that these are the entities that will be directly impacted by the transfer of the Bureau of Indian Education Navajo District. So we have ODAC, which deals with a lot of the compliance and monitoring of funding. They also do the reauthorization every year. Office of Diné School Improvement. As you guys know, Navajo Nation received the Diné School Accountability Plan. They're the ones who actually implement that, but also they provide technical support to help improve schools. Office of Diné Curriculum Assessment and Development, which is managed by Maggie Benali. She actually puts together assessments, does the teacher certification for Navajo language. She also is responsible for the DOLA, the Diné Oral Language Assessment, and now they're building a report card there just to help schools gauge their performance on Navajo language. Office of Educational Research and Statistics, they provide a lot of the data analysis of school performance, primarily for the 66 schools. Cognia, which was formerly Advanced Ed, which was managed right now by Dr. Anselm Davis. And they're the entity that is responsible for doing the accrediting for schools. So these are only 5 programs. The other responsibilities of Department of Education is they also support their post-secondary, and that's Office of Navajo Nation Scholarship and Finance, Financial Assistance, ONSFA, and Diné Scholarship Annual Fund, and that's managed primarily by Rose Graham. Supplemental programs. These are 3 other programs, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, and these are rehabilitation at the home level. This has nothing to do with the school site. So the funding there comes from the feds as well, but this is just primarily in the home site. Johnson O'Malley funds are funds that actually go to public schools. As you guys know, we have almost 14 school districts on the Navajo Nation that manage almost 140 different public schools. The Navajo Nation Library, Office of Youth Development. The other entity that we, Department of Education also manages is Navajo Head Start. So, you know, we talk a lot about these offices, and what we looked at as well is out of all these offices in the blue, we've identified only 34 total FTE, which is the employees in Departments of Education. This is 34 for the entire Navajo Nation. And this is really important to understand because I don't know if any of you guys have learned about the changes in the Every Student Succeeds Act. Tribes are now responsible for working with local education agencies, meaning public schools, to do tribal consultation. So Navajo Nation Department of Education is layering more responsibilities on their 34 employees to meet that additional demand. They also brought in Diné School Accountability Plan, which requires all these additional functions. And then, so DODE, even though they, in Title 10, they have a lot of authority, they don't have the resources, the funding to actually meet the demands that are rising up in our educational system. If you look at nationally, our education system is putting more expectations upon tribes to step up and be at the table in that conversation. And because Navajo Nation is unbelievably large, we're getting public schools from Albuquerque, from Minneapolis, from Nevada, actually asking for input and approval from the Navajo Nation Department of Education to review their tribal consultation packet. And that just puts a lot of strain on those 34 FTEs. So when we're talking about creating a new system for Navajo education, we need to also build the capacity of the Department of Education. So when we do this 93-638 transfer, we're talking about adding, in this box you'll see all the yellows are the new offices. This is helping to empower the Department of Education to manage all these responsibilities that are defined in their Title 10, that are defined under the Every Student Succeeds Act, and even state plans. In state plans, they clearly state that tribes would be pivotal players in this. So what we're adding into these is, besides additional employees at each of these, the frontline offices, we're also adding in the Office of School Solutions and Management. As you guys know, DOTI gets dinged sometimes because they've had to retrocede some of their schools. What does that mean? It means we have a tribally controlled school that has corrective action plans. They don't fulfill it. What happens is the Navajo Nation Council makes a determination along with the recommendation from the Navajo Nation Board of Education to give that school back. If we're building a BIE system that meets the expectations, we need to operate and actually make sure schools aren't given back to the BIE. So this Office of School Solutions and Management is really responsible for building the school solutions team that you see at many states, operating to make sure that their schools are performing. What these guys do is they pull expert principals, expert business techs, expert school improvement teams, teachers, to go into a school that's struggling and help them with their corrective action. And by doing that initiative, they're given a time period to help resolve those issues there. And so generally, you know, the School Solutions Office is a very pivotal and important office that will really build the capacity of Department of Education to be better. Office of Educational Human Resources. One of the biggest challenges of the Navajo Nation is that when we try to hire our own staff, we have to use a Navajo Nation government. When we're creating this new system, we're actually talking about extracting Department of Education as a division out of the Navajo Nation government and establishing it into what we call a tribal charter model. Just like this institution here, Dcollege, they have their own in-house human resources, they have their own business office, they have their own in-house facilities, they have their own legal counsel that supports them. But all of those individuals have one mission, one goal, and that's to support this institution here, the Navajo Nation's Tribal College. And through this process, you know, so it's making sure that they're focused on that one goal. Rather than Navajo Nation government has 19,638 programs, they have to learn funding sources from all over. That's too much for one entity to manage. So that's why when we complain about bureaucracy, the slowness, that's the challenge, is that we've overburdened a system that's ready to self-destruct. And so we're saying, well, if we're going to create a system that meets the needs of our future Navajo education system, we need to make sure that it has a semi-autonomous entity built in. So this is why we're adding the human resources, we're adding the education, finance, and business, and the Office of Facilities and Maintenance.
Dr. Benali touched on this next subject that I'm going to talk to about. We all have heard the issues with Navajo Head Start. So I want to clarify how we can accomplish to help Head Start. So as we move into this proposed plan, the current system doesn't work for Head Start. And that's why you hear a lot of, through the media, you hear a lot of things, negative things about Head Start. It's because the education system, particularly Head Start, it does not work with the current system. There's a lot of red tape that Head Start has to go through. So with this proposed plan, Head Start would go under this plan so that things can be expedited a lot faster. We can hire staff, we can pay bills, everything that you read in the media, things will be accomplished a lot faster. So that is part of this plan. As you can see, Head Start is at the right of the organizational chart. So this is very important that We know we've heard through the past public hearings that you guys can't even handle Head Start. Why are you guys wanting to move in this direction? Well, this is the purpose, this is the reason. It's because we can fix Head Start with this movement. Because the current system has its barriers, it's a system that doesn't work for Head Start. So I wanted to clarify that.
Okay. So one point President Bigman reminded me of is that we need to clarify that this is not taking over schools. This is building a system to add the administrative oversight for what BIE does and transferring it over to the Navajo Nation government. One of the questions I'll ask is, well, these are all the functions we do, these are all the FTEs that have these responsibilities. How are you building a structure that'll match those needs? And so this is our description. And I apologize, I know a lot of this has been written out, but we were informed that a diagram would work better for this presentation and to verbalize that. So, so the other part of this is the Office of Information Technology. As you guys know, we don't really have one comprehensive technological structure. We don't have one voice advocating for broadband or advocating for initiatives like E-rate. We need a unified system that really addresses some of the deficiencies in our schools in terms of their technological needs. So this is the entity that is actually doing some research right now and doing a lot of interviews through the leadership of Britt Nelson. They hired Dell Corporation to start thinking about where's the gaps in our technology. So he's working to help build an understanding of those technological needs, but he's also looking at the Navajo Nation. Why haven't they created an E-rate broadband plan that works for all of our institutions? Because we deal with more rural needs than many other tribal nations. The other part of this is the Office of Legislative and Policy Affairs. To me, this is one of the most important offices. Navajo Nation has 5 different school systems. We deal with New Mexico Public Education Department. Do folks know what the recent issue is with the Yazzie Martinez case? We need people who understand what's happening within states. Arizona Department of Education, right? We had a Winter Rock Unified School District just came out of a lawsuit because they weren't following Navajo preference. Utah, the history there, Monument Valley, the schools there with their transportation needs and not fulfilling the expectations of our students. I mean, each state at one point did not advocate on the needs of our Navajo kids. And it became a policy issue. We need a legislative office that can manage those responsibilities, but most importantly, everyone who's ever worked for the Bureau of Indian Education, I don't need to tell you how many corrective action plans are still outstanding. I don't need to tell you how many GAO reports every year is filed against the BIE. I mean, each of the systems that are intended to serve our children are actually being called out, not by us entirely, but by those government accountability offices, those entities. Yazzie Martinez, that was a lawsuit that was filed within the state of New Mexico. It took a judge to rule on behalf of the Navajo people and their kids. So when we talk about this, we need an office that understands these issues, the history, to advocate for with one voice. We don't have that. And we constantly are put into a ringer. We're constantly competing against each other. Tribal college against tribal college, tribally controlled school against tribally controlled school, BIE against other tribes, states against other states, public schools against other public schools. We need one voice that actually does the research, the policy analysis. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this law school get established tomorrow and have that conversation, because we need that unified voice. We need the legal expertise in that particular office. Office of General Counsel, there we're looking at legal support, because a lot of these issues of funding and the responsibilities, they do enter a lot of terrain of education issues, special education, human resources, and just general issues that happen from the tribal level to the state level to the federal level. So we need this entity to help support departments in education. The other part of this structure is because BIE manages these education resource centers, we know that we want to take over those offices that are in Tuba City, Shiprock, Chinle, and Crown Point. And why? Because Navajo Nation, Window Rock, has departments in education, but I mean, Derek can tell you how many hours he's on the road driving back and forth to go from Window Rock to Tuba City, Window Rock to Richfield, Window Rock to Crown Point, to Alamo, to Rama, to Tahajale. I mean, those miles add up, and the wear and tear on Derek Franklin and his team and the amount of miles they spend, we need to be realistic about this new Navajo education system and put offices out there and to take control of those, because we need staff out there. And one of the things that we talk about is increasing FTEs, because at each of those offices, there's approximately 7 staff there. When we do the transfer, we want to add more staff, and we particularly want to focus on special education. And one of the greatest experts of special education is actually here supporting this initiative. And I want to actually ask Harvey Rood to come up and talk about our special education needs for the Navajo Nation and how we're prioritizing this in our education resource centers.
Yeah, Dave, good evening all. It's a pleasure to be here. And some of you may be wondering, why is a guy from Colorado involved in this? I actually became involved in this almost 30 years ago when then President Peterson Za developed an initiative to prepare 1,000 Navajo educators within 5 years using Ford Foundation funding. And I was lucky enough that our president, who was invited, said, let's send the education dean. So I came down, and I've been involved in helping out in different ways over the last almost 30 years for now. But as Dr. Gray has indicated, my expertise is in special education, and we've done a number of projects over the years that have helped to increase the number of special education teachers and leaders on the Navajo Nation. I also serve on the Bureau of Indian Education Advisory Board for Exceptional Children, and I know firsthand the difficulties in providing services to children with disabilities in the 183 BIE operated and tribally controlled schools across the country. To make this really short, for the last 8 years since they've been keeping track of this data, the Bureau of Indian Education, which serves as a quasi-state education agency for compliance with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, has been out of compliance. In other words, and this is not to point the finger because this is almost an undoable job, but they have had significant compliance issues, performance issues, where they are on significant improvement plans. Now, the difficulty is when you talk about Navajo Nation, there are 66 of those schools that operate within the accountability systems of 3 different states. So it's almost impossible to have the performance measures that are expected by federal law be in compliance when you're looking at 3 different accountability systems with 3 different assessment programs, 3 different sets of standards. And I just want to say this is a marvelous opportunity for the Navajo Nation and the Department of Education to have that unified and comprehensive approach to how education for Navajo learners is supported, not just for special education, which is near and dear to my heart, but for all learners across that comprehensive system. So the opportunity here is that this is something, as has been already indicated, that has been developing for over 50 years, and Navajo always does a wonderful job. And I think the guiding philosophy that you all know is that the education of Navajo children is best determined by Navajo people.
So this next question is, how do we arrive at the tribal chartered model? So if you take a look at the slide on the left side, it says current structure. So that current structure is the current structure that's in place, and that's the Navajo Nation government being involved with education. So when you think about government functions have a lot of cool things that they can do. They have eminent domain, where if you're not using your home site lease, for your grazing permit area, they can go and take your land and start building houses on there. That's a chapter authority, Navajo Nation authority. Another cool thing that they can do is they can tax. They have the ability to tax, and they have a process in place. The other thing that is really cool is they have a bond financing where you can go and create bonds. Unfortunately, here at the college, our bond capability is only at $2 million, so we want to up that. But they have ability to put bonds in place. Lastly, they have another cool function, that's the ability to set regulations. So being a regulatory body, one of the things that as a regulatory body, they're not able to do is they're not able to operate. Part of the reason why is because it creates a conflict of interest. You can't say, I'm the regulatory agency and I'm going to operate at the same time. Meaning that DOTI is not going to take over schools because they'll have a direct conflict of interest because they're a regulatory agency and the school is an operating function. So you can't do both because that's a conflict. So just an FYI there that DOTI is not going to take over a school because there's a conflict of interest and they can't operate a school. On the right-hand side, you see that one, it says Section 17 Corporation. Corporations, they have cool functions. They act fast. A board can meet. They can do what they can do to resolve policies. They can set policies. They can put procedures in place. And they act very fast, and that's why people like corporations. But there's another reason why people like corporations. One is that they're separated from government. The government can't get involved with them. The government can't go and say, well, give me your money. I need to build new roads, so we're going to take some money from you. It kind of sounds like that, what's going on with the current situation with tariffs, but those are policies that they put in place. So government can't reach into business, and they can't micromanage business, so they're a little detached. They're more further attached away from the government functions. Right in the middle is the tribal model, and that's a mixture of both corporations and government functions. And that's part of the reason why we're moving along with the tribal model, is because it blends both of them perfectly in order to have the effectiveness. So there's a long process that goes in place, and we'll talk about it when it goes into the timeline. But what I want to point out here is an example now. Let's go back to Head Start. So Head Start, we know, has a lot of problems. One of the problems that goes back to it is its structure. So let's dissect it. Imagine this circumstance here where you go home to your spouse and you tell them, I'm going to pay for 80% of the food and you're going to pay for 20% of the food. But the kicker in this deal is that you're not allowed to work. Do you think that is a fair deal? Well, that's the circumstance Head Start is in. So the reason why Head Start can't get a job is because if you look at it, there's a lot of bureaucracy that we talked about. So when they go and they apply for outside funding, when the funding comes to Navajo, Navajo has to accept the funding. Then they have to create the account structures and the financial infrastructure that will support where these grant dollars go. So when they get audited, they can say, well, we can trace our money back, and this is where it's at. That process there will take about 6 to 9 months for it to be set up. And by the time you're ready to do your RFP now and say, okay, now we have our money here, we need to expend the money. In most cases, they'll have about 3 months to spend that money before they're dinged again and saying, well, you're out of compliance because you didn't spend enough money. So you're being penalized for doing your job, And so that's the structure Head Start is in. That's why they can't raise money outside, because the process is too long. And secondly, when you look at the funding structure, 80% comes from the federal government, 20% comes from Navajo Nation. So there's a lot of money out there. There's grant dollars, there's money from the states, there's money from private foundations. And if you look at what Dcollege did this year, they did one fundraising event. And in that one fundraising event, they were able to raise $250,000. So an organization like Head Start can go out and get these funding monies now if they're independent, because now the process will be faster. So if you look at the reasons why Head Start is failing, you know, a big part of the problem has to do with its own structure. And you can't blame somebody for things that are going wrong with them if you created that problem for them. You know, otherwise it's just like getting mad at a person that is blind for being blind. You know, Head Start already has this problem, so that's one of the current, you know, the way we're going to fix this is fixing Title 10 and making those amendments and making it a tribal organization, so that way it could be more responsive, it can be more flexible, and it can be able to engage at a faster rate.
There's one thing that I forgot to mention when we were talking about the this model here. Let me tell you some real life events that happen with tribally controlled schools, grant schools. I always use this example because it paints a picture of why we need to do this. Again, I work for the Office of Compliance, Accountability and Compliance. So there was a school in the Western Agency that asked me for help in regards to special education. They didn't have a special education teacher. For some reason, that person up and left. For whatever reason, non-renewed or just up and left. They didn't have a special education coordinator. That person just up and left. So the principal knew that they're going to get behind in IEPs. They knew that we're going to get behind in services that needed to be provided to those students. I believe at the time they had 12 students. So they said, Mr. Franklin, can you help us? Can you help us with the IEPs? Can you help us? We need somebody. So my office, if you look at the organizational chart, the current structure, we don't have a special education office that specifically works with schools and IEPs. We have a structure that goes out and provides assistance at the home, but not at the school. That is kind of the school's responsibility. But because they were lacking a special education teacher, they couldn't provide services. So I explained to them that the only individual, or the only agency that has that capability is the BIE. So Dr. Lewis and myself, we went over to the BIE and we asked them directly, can you help this school? This school doesn't have a special education teacher or a coordinator to help with with their IEPs and their services. The BIE basically just said no. They said no to us. For this reason, each grant school is given 100% of their funding, so that grant school can go out and look for a special education teacher. They can send out an RFP. They can send out, which is a request for services. They can advertise that position. So right now the school, at that time the school was already 2 months behind where the students weren't receiving special education services. So the school was advertising. The school was looking for somebody to help. They were trying to look for somebody. So they have, and we'll get to this, they have funding from Title I, from special education. They have positions that they have at the BIE. They could have easily directed one individual to go there and help them, but they said no. So Dr. Lewis and I went higher. We went higher all the way up to Washington to ask them, and they said the same thing. That school already has 100% of funding. They have the funding. It's just sitting there. They can hire somebody. Well, also, 4 weeks is on top of the 2 weeks. They were so behind in compensatory services. We kept knocking on BIE's door. Finally, they sent somebody out there. But that person was told, these are your limitations. You will not do this, you will not do this, you'll just guide them. You'll just tell them. Which the school was like, well, what's the purpose of BIE being here if they're just going to sit there? They're just going to watch us. They needed somebody, because you have to be certified to handle an IEP. They didn't have a school counselor, by the way, at that school. So there was an individual that worked for the BIE. I'm not going to name this individual because I don't want to get her in trouble. She was from that area. And she was certified. She was wanting to help that school. She worked for the federal government. What she did to help that school was she took 2 days of her personal leave to go to that school and help them. Because of her expertise, because of her certification, to help that school. And guess what? The school got caught up. And then they finally hired a special education teacher that finally applied. But it's those kind of hoops that schools have to jump through in order to get services, in order to get help. Whereas if we move into this new model, the superintendent can easily say, okay, you certified people, go over there tomorrow and help the school. Help them with their IEPs, help them with their whatever they need help with special education, so that they can be in compliance on their special education. So these are things that we can move to help provide services to grant schools in a lot faster way. So I wanted to share that with you. And I have a lot more stories, scary stories from BIE and grant schools.
So another question that we get asked is, are you taking our money? And so I'll apologize right now. These slides are really detailed, but we're also being really, really transparent by providing the detail. So remember I told you that there's 2 agencies that provide funding to BIE. This first one is the U.S. Department of Interior. And we are providing a 3-year window. When you see and look down from the operation funds of education program enhancements to tribal education departments, and then education management, all the way to education IT. There's no formula funded monies like ISEP that goes our administrative costs funding that actually is being identified to help support this transition. We also explained earlier that U.S. Department of Education provides funding as well. You can see in this first column, amount to DOI, BIE. This is the total amount, but what they also do is add calculate a 5% administrative overhead. That 5% administrative overhead amounts to about $11 million, which goes to BIE just to do the administrative implementation. What you'll notice beneath these is Navajo Nation request 1/3. Navajo Nation request 1/3. So what we're asking for in putting this 638 transfer is we're taking the same logic that other tribes had. They viewed their ADD or their education line office as kind of a pie, that, you know, a quarter of them, those are our students, a quarter of those are our schools. So our expectation is you're going to fund us at the quarter that you are obligated to give to our students. And many times the funding question comes, and those monies belong to the Navajo Nation. I mean, when we negotiated the treaty back in 1868, you know, there was a responsibility that the federal government had given, because we gave in exchange our land, our resources, our lives. And so these funds, when we say what's owed to the Navajo people, these are approximation. Obviously, a lot of it is we're still underfunded, but this is the logic that we're initiating for both Department of Interior funds and U.S. Department of Education funds. So in order to give a big picture, these 638 contracts, we've listed off to the right on this column over here, the sources of funding and a 5-year overview. Because when we submit our 638 contract, generally that's the window that we want to start implementing all these actions over a 5-year course of time. So, but you remember that chart earlier. So what is the total cost though? Even though we're asking for these funds, we're identifying these funds from the Green Book, the total cost to actually make DOTI become the entity that we believe will manage the responsibilities of transferring the Navajo district over is $9.9 million. About 2.5 would be retained through the tribal general funds. And in the Public Law 93-638 funding, we're looking for 7.4. So there's a lot of excess, and so you can also see that we broke it down by the new offices. As you can see, the light greens are the 638 fundings, the dark greens are the tribally general funds. I mean, I have a lot of political commentary about all of this, but I think, one thing that gets brought up is that Department of Education, over the course of 10 years, has actually declined in its funding from tribal general funds. And that's also what's put DOTI in the corner, because they're looking for additional resources to support the number of FTEs and the number of responsibilities that are being pushed against them. So this is our effort to build a capacity through the funding element. But let me remind you guys, this effort is not about money. This effort is about getting the BIE to transfer the authority to the Navajo Nation to manage the administrative oversight. And that's what we're seeking. That's the primary goal of any transfer of authority. When you look at 638 contracts, it's the transfer of authority. The funding is secondary. The funding is only there to support the tribe and ensuring that they're implementing the responsibilities at capacity level. So we've kind of already covered a lot of these. These were kind of our concluding remarks. The next question we get is, how long will this process take? So there's 4 stages. We're clearly in the first stage of preparation. We're all these public hearings, all this research, all this analysis, all this engagement with stakeholders. We're really striving ultimately for that tribal resolution for the 638 contract. And it will also prompt our ability to build our capacity. The second stage of this, the negotiation, is once we have the contract with the tribal resolution, that gets submitted, the feds have 90 days to respond. If we give them the contract and they forget about it sitting on the administrative assistant's desk for 90 days, it's an automatic approval. But we're expecting, because this is probably one of the biggest initiatives and we've been following social media and everything, we know that BIE knows we're pursuing this effort. And we know that they are interested in the negotiating, and they will bring their solicitors, they will bring their experts, and we have a lot of experts here in the room who are very familiar with the functions and the responsibilities. We even have our former Bureau of Indian Education director who knows all the places where they hide all the skeletons. So, it's ensuring that we keep and hold BIE accountable, because they've not been held accountable at all. I mean, they've completely allowed these GAO, these corrective action issues to continue to proliferate, and we need to put a stop to it because it's hurting our kids. Then the next step is transfer of authority. That begins, once it's approved, it starts triggering these moves. That power, which means that authority, we need to ensure that we have strengthened our Title 10, our legislative amendments, which is the Tribal Code for Education, our Title 11, our Title 2 in Education Code, so that we're our Tribal Code, so that we're able to also have and ensure that we build in that authority and oversight. Then our final element for the negotiation is the implementation period. And we begin either transferring those 56 FTEs, or for Ruli Bull, we RIF all those 56 FTEs, meaning reduction in force. They have to reapply for all their jobs. And the hope is we keep maybe the salary level, the salary scale, so that we keep those qualified people in these positions. This is actually a really detailed process of our education contract. I think, this is the 5-year window, but there's a lot of mini steps within that, and things like policies and procedures for finance, governance, human resources. There's a lot of things that we still have to develop, but we are asking today that we need your input. I know that throughout all these 5 public hearings, we've gotten a lot of criticism. But I think, we got people who are telling us flatly no. But this is an opportunity that started back in 1973, and this is the first time any type of research has been initiated to push this out. As we do these public hearings, we need to hear your ideas. We need to have and hear your suggestions as we progress through this process. When Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez had said, we need these public hearings, he was really concerned that he wasn't hearing enough from the parents and the grandparents. How can we improve our educational system so that it becomes better? And so coming out to the public, coming out to our communities, coming out to our agencies, we're asking you to give us some feedback on these efforts. And then the last question that generally gets asked is, what other stakeholders have been informed? I'm going to go ahead and let Derek talk about this, and I guess we'll kick off our public hearing after that.
Before I go into the stakeholder engagement, when a tribe, I want to explain this, for the people who work for the BIE or the federal government, when a tribe wants to 6 or 8 contract services from the BIE cannot say no. They have to go with it. If the tribe approves themselves and submits a contract, they can't say no. They just can't. So in the past public hearings, people are asking, well, what does BIE think? What did they say? They can't say anything. So I just wanted to clarify that. So we had, back in 2018 of October, the Board of Education approved they approved their resolution to support Public Law 638. They approved it. This movement to 638 contract the BIE Navajo District back in 2018. December 2018, we were asked to provide an update at the DBOSBA Legislative Summit in Albuquerque. So both Dr. Gray Eyes and myself presented this information. So those school board members that attended, they really can't say that we don't know about this movement. And then on March 26, 2019, we had a work session at Twin Arrows Casino with HESI. The Health Education Human Services Committee wanted a work session for DOTI to explain what their initiatives are. So we did explain to them the 638 contract. We talked to them about the DSAP. We talked to them about the movement to become a state education agency. So those were 3 items, hot topics as we call them, that we discussed with the Health Education Human Services Committee. Then in May of 2014 or 2019, on May 14th, the Health Education Report, we provided a report on the stakeholder input. And then June 29th of this year, we again provided another report on the initiative of DOTI moving or elevating itself to a state education agency. Then on August 24th, we provided a work session to the Navajo Nation Board of Education. Then October 16, we provided a presentation to school boards again at their request. It was a specific one-on-one discussion with school boards. And then on October 23rd, we provided a report to the Office of the President and Vice President. At that time, they asked us to move forward with these public hearings. So that's those are the tribal leadership that was given this information. So at this time, I will open up the first public comment. I believe there's a mic over here. If you want to use that mic, or if you want to use this mic, to provide your input as to what you think, any suggestions that you may have. According to council delegates, the ones that attended this presentation, they basically said we cannot leave things the same way. We cannot leave things status quo. We have to keep moving to improve education on Navajo Nation. So with that, I want to open up who would be the first volunteer to provide their input. We ask that you please state your name and then your school affiliation.
Shane Lee, Nasha from Inscription House, and I'm also the school board president for Shantou Preparatory School. And I have several comments as a parent, as a school board member, and as a chapter president for Tsapikin. My chapter, Tsapikin chapter, approved the transfer of Navajo District to Dodi Sunday at dawn. So we did approve that, and we can't keep in the same old rut and keep going with the same old car. It falls apart, and it's time that we need to take over our own educational system. We're just dependent on BIE so long that the high salaries we're paying the BIE teacher. I was a BIE teacher for 24 years, and it wasn't going anywhere. People are just happy with their salaries and making $42 an hour and having no progress. People are just waiting for retirement. We experienced that with Kaibito Boarding School. The board non-renewed the principal for 11 years. Every year they non-renew her. But BIE director, they keep keeping her there. Now they only have 80 students? When I was working there, we had 420 students. So even that, they didn't catch, they didn't hear that message of parents saying, we do not want this principal. So they don't understand that, they don't listen to parents. We look at downsizing. We also passed a second resolution. Downsizing school board members at every school, 66 BIE funded schools. The 34 grant schools and the 32 BIE to 3 board members. You don't need more than 3 board members. And most of our board members are not. You look at Chinle Unified, you look at Wendarock Unified, you look at Page, you look at all of these public school board members. These board members are invested in education. They have backgrounds in education. They have backgrounds in a professional field. Look at our board members' background for these 66 schools. Do they have that background? Local empowerment, no and it's not moving forward. So we need to take that, shake out all of those mentality of doing things the same way as it's always been done. You go and look at their vehicles. Every 2 years they buy a new vehicle. I save up money and buy a vehicle when I get enough, and I go to CarMax or Craigslist and pay for a vehicle in cash. And that's what we should be doing, investing in our children. The effectiveness of board leadership. Dr. Gray Eyes, 204 board members. How many board members are at these attending these things? If we held this in Vegas, we'd have 204 board members. And you go look at our school board associations. Are they really advocating for students? Does she? I don't see that. They're not advocating for, I've been on the Boswa School Board. I was on there for 8 years. I didn't see them advocating for students. I was on the NAGSA, Native American Grant School Association, as the executive board member. All we were talking about is where are we going to hold another conference so we can raise more money. It wasn't student interest. So what is the main interest? It's just, let's host another conference over here, let's host another conference. Next week, this weekend, there's 3 school board conferences in Las Vegas. The Net Grant School Association's having their school board conference there. Native American Grant School is holding their conference there. The BOSBA is holding their conference in Albuquerque. And then we have the National Impact School Associations for the public schools. They're in Vegas right now. So how much money does the board waste on sending their board members here and there? I would like that. If you can get that research and get that funded. I would like to know, how much do we spend sending these board members all over the place? Is it relevant to what their schools are at? And the roles of our board members. I look at my own board. When we bring up things and we talk about things, well, I'm not going to vote with you, I'm not going to support your vote. It's very childish. The board members that I serve with are not mature enough to be board members. And when you bring up vital issues of what you have, and my poor sisters are suffering because when I bring up issues of what we need to do, they end up being voted against. And in many of our grant schools, you bring up issues and you get non-renewed. Many people are non-renewed because they voice their concerns. There's no representative for grant school employees. So if we go under the tribe, then at least we have a voice. We would have a voice and a grievance procedures. Grant school employees do not have any voice. Their only kickback is non-renewal is not an adverse action. What does that mean? It just means that if you don't please us, we can get rid of you. And then you look at the teachers that we have in our school system. Arizona just passed a state certification. If you have your bachelor's degree and you failed the teacher's test three times, if you're just in the classroom and if you're helping in the classroom, principal can just sign and say, yes, you worked in the classroom, you are now a certified teacher. And to me, as a teacher of 37 years, that's an insult. We passed the test, and then they come in and they get the same beginning salary as a teacher that passed. Why can't they say, okay, until you pass and become fully certified, we will give you the salary. But they automatically walk in at that salary, a beginning teacher salary, when you walked around the system. And that's not right. Are we going to teach our kids to do that? And with the grant schools, there's a lot of self-interest, a lot of nepotism. There are many grant schools, and I'm sure Mr. Franklin can name them right off, of grant schools using nepotism. They're hiring their own relatives, making room for their own relatives. And that's how I ended up leaving the school that I worked at, just down the road, because they needed their relatives to come back and work. So we need that classroom, so you need to go. So that's not right and that's not fair. We need to have letter grades for all schools, like the state does, Arizona with that. Shanto High School moved up from a D, and we're the only charter school. You don't have that on your chart. We're the only charter school left, and our scores are higher than Navajo Prep. Our scores are higher than Window Rock. Our scores are higher than Chin Lee. We went from a D to a C. We're 8 points from a B. So we can make that, and that's what we're working on this year, to make that moving up to getting that grade. And then another one is the BIE refuses to release data, their standardized test data. Back 15 years ago, they used to have the listing of all 66 schools and how they perform. And within the last 8 years, I haven't seen any. They won't release that information. Why? Because grant schools are outperforming them. The only one that's performing high is Tuba City Boarding. Anod Nebazad. The Nebazad Beyat Kieki Hashitao Jo'odotni. We looked at the Hawaiian model about 10 years ago, when all the council delegates and all the school boards and all of us were on the plane to Hawaii. We toured the schools, we toured the Head Start, we toured the nurseries, we went to the tribal colleges, and my sister was selected as the Teacher of the Year by NIEA. So I got a free pass. But she went on all of these tours, and then we went with her. It's full immersion. At that time, when they started this program, there were only 50 people speaking Hawaiian fluently. Now it's back. My grandsons are half Hawaiians. They still call and they talk to them in Hawaii. My 2 grandsons. The culture teacher from Hawaii calls. Now we can do Skype and video. So they call them and tell them, this is your father's language. You need to learn, but they no. And that's how they follow through. And Ada Benantin. On your graph, and they're inciting the board members to say no, because they think that all of that admin money is going to go to the Dodi. And if we do this transfer, that admin money needs to stay within the tribe or the education revenue. The interest needs to stay in there, not to the Navajo Nation General Fund. You need to keep that money and keep that interest in there, because that interest can be used to upgrade, to help. And if we can make the BIE or federal government replace these schools, our housing is obsolete. When I was at Lukachake boarding school, or community school, the apartment I live in was built in 1952. So that's how old those buildings are. So if we can look at that and get some buildings like we have over at Chinle Unified, I work over there now. And it only takes one person to destroy a program. One person. And there are checks and balances. What are your checks and balances? We went through a hard lesson at Shantou Preparatory School with one person that they hired as a superintendent. And the money and the travel and all of that, we spent. Every year we go in for reauthorization. For the past 8 years, 7 years, we've been getting dinged on that because of that one person misusing funds. And every year we face Derek's crew telling us, you guys are still non-compliant, you're still non-compliant. And that's how long the effect is. The same thing with your Head Start. What background check do you do? You know that that person ruined Shantou, basically. Head Start in the with that track record, she did the same thing to Head Start. Why we were, we tell you guys, and then you're, the only negative I see with Dodi is when you go into the schools to help with Rough Rock, to help with Wide Runes, you get that administrator that has a bad record and you put them at those schools. So what we need, and what you need, I recommend strongly, is what the public school has. Takeover administrators. Have a strong team of takeover administrators that comes in, evaluates the school, and takes control for that whole year or 2 years. Get the school back in. Train your leadership. And I was part of the cohort for NAU. And when my last semester, I didn't finish the last semester because my daughter was a senior and she was playing for Monument Valley volleyball team. So I said, may I sit this semester out? I'll finish up in the spring. I'll do summer school. No, you have to stay with us. So I ended up being dropped from the program. Otherwise I would have been an administrator now. But, and I'm glad I didn't finish with that cohort because all of the people in that cohort that had their administrative degree were all charged with misuse of funds. So I said, no more, I'm glad I wasn't part of it. So the 10 people that finish up, that was the blacklist. Ako what you're looking at the VOTEC colleges. Not everyone's going to go into college. Not every child is going to be a college graduate. We need to build electricians, we need to build carpenters, we need to build other organizations of VOTEC. Everybody's going into college. And I like that little cartoon of the electrician going in to disconnect the boy that has a degree in a master's degree in philosophy. Because he's not paying. I'm still waiting for a job, no sata. And he didn't pay for his electricity. So I have kids that are welders, that are electricians, that have come back and said, Miss Tate, I'm gonna buy your classroom pizza. Thank you for teaching me. But I make twice as much as you do. I said, good for you, thank you. I'm glad I made an impact in your life. And that's what we should be looking at is, how do we say, let's move on and let's get this done. We're not, BIE is not going to be around forever. Are we going to sit here and wait? So, so we can't just sit and wait for all of these things. And I support you guys. And we do have our resolutions, and we'll send you copies of those resolutions.
Yeah, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. I see a lot of good people here. And me and my wife Darlene, we came from Rough Rock. And we have as a, my name is Rex, red hair. And my wife is Darlene, red hair. And as a community member, so we have some concerns that we have. I don't know if the grant school is under the tribes, all the grant schools. But what we saw, I'm just going to tell you what I saw and what I know, and some of the things that happened. Dr. Elaine and I have a lot of scary stories. She didn't mean 1969, that was a rough at school Hollywood under a gentleman named Dr. Russell. In Juno but somewhere along the way, I don't know when, like a eroding dam, a dam that's eroding really slowly now. Our schools start eroding to the point that we're very concerned of our school now. And one of the big things that I control, that somewhere along the way, this grant school becomes a family control. Certain family takes over. When that happens, the whole school starts going down. I mentioned nepotism. Along with nepotism, there's favoritism too. Whether you're qualified or not, if you apply at that school, they won't hire you, because if you're an enemy of that family, or if that family doesn't like you, you're not going to get hired, no matter what. But if you don't have no education, if you're a family, if you're a friend of that family, you're certainly going to get hired. And I heard that Rough Rock is not the only school that is experiencing that kind of activity. Other schools, certain family takes control. In your policy, in your laws, and whatever's going to govern the school. And even the school board member, the largest family member, elected, good members, you almost have to be a member of that family to be a school board member. That's where nepotism and favoritism and all that begins on the school board member there. And out of the quality of staff, though, it goes down to, it seems like nepotism and favoritism given in that. The quality of staff and teacher goes down. And that will also affect the students' learning ability. According to me and my wife, we had 3 children. We didn't want our local school, we didn't want to send our school to any of our grad school. So with Landi, and our son, Dartmouth school, back east of high school, prep school, former teacher, so we thought those were better school than the reservation school. Hopefully you'll have some kind of a mechanism to to deal with these kind of situation, family control school. I don't know, when you say community control, it is not as in some of the family controls the school. I noticed that at our school, a lot of the teachers, for some reason, the amount of time they spend in classroom is very minimal. They're always on leave, and I noticed substitute. A lot of these substitute don't even have degrees or certification or anything like that. Substitute that they have no, to me, they have no business in the classroom. But the teacher, they're on leave most of the time. I think somebody needs to take a look at that at all the school, how much time these teachers are in the classroom, and how much time the substitute teachers are in the classroom. I know there was one staff, I don't want to mention his name, but he's been a substitute, and he's almost like a regular teacher now. Not so 5 years, that's his thing, and this teacher doesn't even have a degree or anything. And teacher, as recently as a couple of months ago, still yet that teacher or student not he's just back there. And this guy is just only what kind of a teaching is that, you know? And then I understand also that other Christian teachers where some students test out their own teachers will tell the student the answer to the test, so they will look like they're teaching, and so they won't be disciplined or they won't look like they're incompetent. Or if they have no test scores, or if they have no, it looks like their kids or high achieving. Not about that, or other things. And so those are things that I think needs to be looked at, since you guys are looking for some suggestions. So although some things already I was going to touch it when I thought about the salaries though, and teachers all but the way I see it, it seems like the top administrator, but teachers as well, but the administrator, on does it but school, they don't know how to run the school, but teachers, now that the administrator, they make 2 or 3 times as much as the teacher. So so the policies and the rules and the laws that govern the school, it looks good on PowerPoint over here. It looks so nice, it looks so good, it looks so perfect. But there's a lot of things goes wrong with it. So, I know statistic-wise, how many of our kids every year across the reservation, how many thousand of students graduate from high school? Keep track of the college, and then how many of those colleges that goes to college actually graduate? Out of how much money is spent from the tribe paying for all those students? Out of how many goes to other institutions like maybe to other trades. How many of those are certified? And how many of them are and sometimes I think about those things. I wish I could, somebody would tell us, this is how many kids we have every year. Thousands and thousands of students from high school every year. Ako na la kaachman da ilkato na la da ilnito don kan na kan roda don they go to off reservation to look for jobs. And libre just actually with that off reservation ad in Dutch. Adin hanto dashen ako the job then I don't have a job. Even though there might be a job, but the salary is too low that I know other Dutch only finish they had only every for definite nava. Other construction a con has kako. What are passionate I can't darnish and I upon hello darnish simple oh I couldn't other or schlatter because other she a job that long been in a could echo. When I land action and I how come our economy is not growing? Where is the economic development that these kids should be doing for us? Then, so shit got retarded on what she eat. Actually, at Aho, at Andy, actually, Ajeta, the ills, 1972, it's a chimney cloth, and it's the Arab Friday. Got Andy Aho, we're not even moving on the handling. Because Hajan Hatchin about that, so close that is Hana Haja that has that's later on that the Shanley reservation, but not later added a Nanishpata Havno. I don't some of these school, going back to the school, a lot of this school or losing students at Noba, they're losing students, these schools. And here our population is growing, so our students should be growing and our schools should be filled up. Yes, Rafra is barely 43 students, and then when they report 100 students, but there actually is only 43 students that are, and there's about 200 staff. That's I don't know how many is taking care of 43 kids. So could that actually load that the students and our population is growing, but our kids is I know this is happening at every school with I oba net with 88 and maybe some of these things you already know. But what do we do to deal with these kind of problems? Or with Aban's case, I don't hear PowerPoint. Like I said, the PowerPoint looks good. It looks really good. It looks perfect. But not bad. I don't know. That's another thing. I don't care, Charles. Thank you.
I wanted to also add, Mr. Lee introduces but are we looking at providing residential schools in a sense where we have students that are out of control, parents have no discipline. Would we have one in each agency to focus on these students? And with grant schools, again, we can easily, the dilemma Derek was bringing, we can easily send a ESS teacher and we can have that ESS teacher work with the two schools while they're looking for a grant school employee or a teacher for ESS. We can do the grow your own program, and that's what we have. And those are the items that we need to look at. What is the greatest need in our schools? And we're looking at our kids. I know my girls, they don't want to teach. They thought I'm insane for being a teacher. The kids are wild, and you have to have a love of teaching to actually go into the classroom and teach and make that difference. So, but we have students now that are really out of control, that really need that military type setting of school. I know with White Mountain, they send them over to Payson, and then they have them at Payson where it's a girls' school, where it's a military type and it's strict. So they're teaching and they're learning like a boys' town school. And that's what we need. Immerse our children back into the language and culture. And we don't have that. We have too many young parents that are. I love the way Mr. Avery Denny presented his seminars at Chinle Unified of Navajo parenting. They go out and they scout. See how they live, see how that family is. And then you plan your kids. You don't just pop them out. You plan those kids. You put them into the household. Now, we don't think that. We just have kids. In my classroom, in the last 8 years, literally only 5 students came from a home where parents were married. Aimed that we sent that message, it's okay. You can have another person and, oh, that's my brother and this is his dad. No, the instability of our student is really the major factor. Our kids come in and they're hurting. They really are hurting. I have one young boy that came to me in recess and I miss my mom. I said, where's your mom? She took off with her boyfriend. So I'm at my grandma's house. So there's a lot of burden that they come in with, and we expect them. We're doing benchmark testing, and we expect them to score high. They're not going to score high. They're already in pain. We need to build the child. Let's not worry about the testing and the benchmark. Let's worry about building a strong nation, a strong youth. That's what we need to look at.
She is about Britain this year. Kiani initially, touching Dashiche, Adam Shija is Taylor's Spider Clan. I represent Winslow Residential Hall. She made a comment about Residential Hall. I've been attending a lot of these hearings and being informed about it, but I'm concerned because I work at a residential hall. I'm the home living supervisor there. What is going to happen to residential halls if this goes forward? And it looks like it's going forward. What's going to happen to the residential halls that are on Burrtown? What is going to happen to this? Are they going to close down because the students attend a local high school, school district? So that's one of my concerns.
This proposed project is to build Doty's capacity. So it's only to build the capacity so that we can provide better services to all grant schools, whether they're residential or standalone schools or both. So that's the whole purpose of this presentation. So for Winslow, Holbrook, Richfield, Aztec, for those type of dormitories, Flagstaff, they're going to still remain the same. You're still going to be a grant school, a grant residential hall. So that way, you're still going to exist.
Okay, thank you. Now I have another situation that occurred. Recently we had an incident occurred at the residential hall, and we had called the Winslow City Police Department. They told us that the building's on federal land, and it's on federal land, so they could not respond to the incident. So they referred us to Navajo Nation, and I contacted Navajo Nation, but to this date, we have not had an officer come to our residential hall to take care of that. And so from August 28th to now, we haven't had any officer come in and hear our story, take care of this incident. So if this happens, what is Navajo Nation going to do? Are we going to still rely on the Navajo police officers? Or, and I also tried MOU with the city, and they said since it's federal grounds, they have it in the hands of the federal attorney.
So I know your situation, so it's difficult to determine your situation because you're a grad school off the reservation. It really matters on the jurisdiction of the Navajo police and how they communicate with the sheriff's office, or how they communicate with Arizona Public Safety, how they communicate with the state police in terms of that situation that you're describing. So if the Navajo Nation says that Winslow PD is going to take care of it, then they will assign that individual, because it's in the boundaries of the city of Winslow, that they would assess that situation. So, but if Winslow says, no, it's not, then Navajo Nation PD will assess the situation. So I know what you're dealing with, because they're just bumping it off on different law enforcement offices. It's to that point where we need to really sit down with these entities and say if this situation were to ever happen again, how are we going to provide the best possible services to protect the children at these residential programs. So that could be part of in the organizational chart. There's a solutions team box where there will be an individual that will assist in that situation. That if you saw that proposed organizational chart, that solutions individual will come out to help in that capacity.
So it'd be still good. Okay, sorry. Okay, so when they say it's federal land and federal property, and if it goes to Navajo Nation, what becomes of that? Are we still going to be considered federal lands and federal property, or is it going to change over the buildings, or going to change over the Navajo Nation?
The land lease that Winslow Residential Hall resides on, that's the land lease between the federal government and the city of Winslow. So Winslow probably at some point when the residential hall program was set up, there was probably a lease between the city or the state and the federal government. So particularly whatever that land lease states is what jurisdictional boundaries the federal government has, as well as the state, I think. Do you want to add to that?
No, I did.
That's the way I understand it.
The way it starts is with the once you became a grant, it then transferred to the tribe. It's supposed to be. So that's supposed to be transferred to the tribe. So it's not federal property, because we had that issue with Kenlani. It's when you converted, whenever it was, maybe look at those and see there should be a transfer of lease.
The MOU between the county sheriffs, there is an MOU with the county sheriff with Apache, Navajo, and Coconino is the only one that was really hesitant on it. There is an MOU, and you can work with county sheriff, and I know Apache County is, no, you're in Navajo County. Navajo County is very active in coming out to Kayenta, and it's on Navajo Nation. So maybe work with the Navajo County. Apache County though, Mr. Deadman, and then Sheriff Clark, AEA, Apache, or Navajo County. So they work with the Navajo Nation. And they the police inscription house, though. Half of our area is Navajo County, the other half is Coconino. We have more visitations from the Navajo County Sheriff than we do from Coconino County, because we asked them to come out and do some patrolling out there. So Navajo County does really good.
Okay, so we'll move to the next question. Okay.
Ayate Kilichi Shikachi Washington Tia Ani Shirona Kidinada Shinale. And that is Arona Shata the Time for Yakweke Rexley Jim Inchia. Aro Kodo Bahasti and speak as a parent and as a grandparent. Avadai Kodobahadest, a larger. I'm one of those people who believe that we should have, first and foremost, first access to the minds of our own children, as parents and as grandparents, and then to negotiate with schools and what needs to be taught there. Based on that, I also truly believe in Navajo Nation sovereignty. We need to take over the entire education process, which to me means one, getting rid of North Central accreditation and start saying we are going to accredit our own schools. That's number one. Number two, we are going to certify our own superintendents, principals, and so on. We need to certify and say who's qualified and who's not qualified. You don't start with 2 + 2 = 4. And who is best positioned to teach those? All grandparents. And now those are being denied because of background checks and that we didn't go to Western school. By the way, Western school is about one very limited form of education. Education means so much more than going to a school and looking at subjects within the 4 walls. To me, that's not education. That's indoctrination. And we're not interested in that. I'm not interested in that for my kids or grandkids or my relatives and the Navajo people. So when we talk about taking over education, we need to truly take that control of the education. And that to me means perhaps even if we want to go with an outside external accrediting agency, it should be at an international level to become nations among nations. That's the approach we need to be taking. We need to develop our own curriculum. Rock Point had a very exciting curriculum back in my days. And I went through that process. The teachers weren't certified. The school wasn't even accredited. But I went to Princeton. I came out all right. Tamsin went to Stanford, she's all right. So these schools like Rough Rock and Rock Point in their early days have proven that if you follow a curriculum that addresses the specific needs, interests, and of the communities, it can work. Most of these schools we're talking about, including the Grant School, including Rock Point, unfortunately, they decided to go by state standards and state testing things. And most of those just went down. So we need to get away from that. So if the Navajo Nation is going to take over, they need to make sure that they look at some of these and develop that. And we don't want to teach to the test. That's not education. That's not learning. That's memorization and regurgitating facts that others are stuffing into you. We need to get away from there. To teach our children how to think critically, creative, analytically, and so on. We're not teaching them to think. That's the problem. I work with different youth organizations. And one of the things we're trying to do is to directly connect academic learning, skills, and content to local problem solving. We need to set that up that way. The other is prep school. I went to prep schools as well. I had 2 or 3 courses in one day. And in between, I had the time to study and to think and reflect and research and write and to make appointments with the faculty members and engage them in meaningful dialogue. They 7 to 8 classes a day, don't without giving them time to think about what they're learning. So we really need to think about scheduling. In most prep schools, the children of these lawmakers who are suppressing us through their legislations, their children are attending schools away from what they're hurting us through. Ebony and I think we need to have our own school scheduling system where our children have time to reflect and engage faculty during the day. Now, we need quality time is what I'm talking about. The next area is the faculty members in those prep schools. My English teachers, my physics teachers, they have PhDs in the subject they're teaching in. They're not certified by states and other standards. They have their degrees, that's their expertise, and when they get out there and start lecturing, you can feel the excitement they exude. It's what they love to do. That's what they study on their own. That's what they invested in. And so they share that with you. So we need to start rethinking of how we certify our teachers. We're turning into generalists. And that's not obvious, not working. So we need to look at that. And the other is, in Finland, their #1 goal for their school is to be happy. Not to make straight A's. Not to graduate from high school or go to a decent school, but to be happy. And it's been proven over time when you have fun and you're excited, you're exploring and having a wonderful time and discovering, you learn more and you retain more. And we don't need to go anywhere for that. As I tell people out there, we already have that as a philosophy for our people, for our nation. To have happiness and balance and harmony and so on. We just need to tap into that. We need to look at the way our people learn it through the ceremonial systems. Talking about kinesthetic, people were running, they were dancing and singing and geometry through the sand painting, their hands on, and we need to relook at that and then take that and bring it into our classrooms. So my whole point is, if we are going to take over, let's take over completely, and I'll be there with you, fighting with you, whatever needs to be done. Thank you.
My daughter got hers before I did. She's #1, so I want to honor her with that respect. But Dolores Grayizing, she had to put it in the short walk on the chain, the company that should chain, I am currently serving as a vice chair to on the Navajo Technical University Board. I also served 4 years on the Navajo Nation Board of Education. So I'm a proud mom of 3 beautiful daughters, and who are all professionals at this point. But as Navajo people, based on our clan system, we are, parents, grandparents, to every child that we come across. And so today I'm speaking from that perspective, and I'm glad my Nully, our former Vice President, Rexley Jim, spoke in the way that he did. I respect a lot of the work that he does, and I agree that if we're going to take over our education system, we need to do it all. Not just BIE, not just the tribally operated schools, but public schools. I'm concerned that many of our children are not prepared to compete at the university levels. each year we graduate probably close to 2,000, 2,500. Probably a good percentage of them go to college, universities. By the end of the first semester, many of them are on probation, suspension, because they didn't make the grade. By the second semester, they've lost their scholarships, whether it be a tribal scholarship, an academic scholarship like the Chief Manuelito, and other scholarships that the university has offered. And this really concerns me, and then it really ties down, or goes down, filters down into the job that they do. I work for public safety, and just an example is that, we've had shortages of police officers, corrections officers, EMT, firefighters, forever. And they have to meet certain criteria. And one of the biggest one up front is background checks. Many of our people cannot pass background check because of the different substances that they were involved in, resulting in criminal activity that they're involved in. And when they do get in, let's say maybe 25 individuals applied. By the time the background is done, we only have 10. And then when we get them into the academy, that 10 becomes 3 or 4. So if you can see the numbers that are dropping as they go higher. And the reason that, we get so few graduating out of the numbers that we recruit is because of academics. They are failing when they have to go into the academy and they have to take exams, they have to learn Navajo Nation laws, state laws, etc. And they can't pass the tests. So, but the reason that I kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time, I did a research recently to get my PhD. And the subject of my research was school discipline, a pipeline to prison. Navajo males' perspectives. So what I did, I have an interest because, again, like I said, I as a parent, I see the number of our children not making it at universities. I also see the data. Each year on the Navajo Nation, we process between 26 to 35,000 of our individuals in tribal jail. In New Mexico, there were some issues of them asking us for help because 40% of the prison population is Navajo. In New Mexico. I don't have the numbers for Arizona, but it's probably up there. Nationally, Native Americans are at least a good percentage are in federal, state prison across the United States. So it's really alarming. And when I went to a forum at Arizona State University, this subject became really interesting to me, so I decided that that's what I was going to do my dissertation on. And so I went to the Winslow prison, it's a state prison, and I focused on education. I did individual groups, and I did individual and group sessions. And my questions focused on education. I asked them, why are you here? How did you get here? Can you tell me? Well, a lot of the perspective was that I don't have a job. I didn't finish my education because I didn't have support in my school. When I was falling behind, my teachers didn't care to spend time with me. The children who got the attention were those ones that were well-dressed, the ones that were popular, the ones that had parents that were educators or administrators in the system, or tied somehow in the community as positive or strong families. I didn't, is what they said. I was a Navajo. I was out there herding sheep. I had nothing to wear. Some days I didn't, because I was out herding sheep, I didn't have anything clean to wear. I didn't have the material so that I can do my homework. We just had an oil lamp that we did our homework to. After a while, I guess they got bored because they were kind of just set off to the side. The teacher didn't want to pay attention to them, so they started getting labeled. And as they got labeled, they became, they realized that through that, they got the attention of the teachers. And pretty soon they were fighting, pretty soon they were talking back to the authorities in the school. That's how they got the attention that they needed. And so, one of the schools had a resource officer. So after a bit of time, the teachers and administrators, what they would do is just call the resource officers. And that individual got arrested. I said, what did they do with you? Did they take you home and sit you down with your parents? What happened? No, they took me down to the detention center. My parents didn't come for me for over a week. And finally they had to take me home because my parents didn't want me at home either, because I was labeled a problem child. You know, these were the kinds of things that they told me. One of the young gentlemen, and the age group that I studied was between 24 and 34. One of the young men says to me, you know, my teacher told me that I'm a no good Indian. He told me that I will be in jail, or no, you'll be in prison or you'll be dead. And so he says, I guess this is my destiny. And it was an individual that he had respected. And then what he said was, we were very young, so anything and everything you said, we soaked it up. I soaked that up. So I believe that the best place for me is being here in prison. It was very sad. They didn't get treated any better because of what was going on at home, at school. So the parents were angry. They got whipped. One of them says, you know, I had a belt that hung by the door. It had a metal buckle. That's what my dad used to whip me. And another one talked about his bus ride home, where he got beaten up, where he was sexually molested. He said, I didn't tell anybody because I was on the football team. I didn't want to be labeled. And he apparently had been sexually abused for a good number of his years. Because he couldn't talk about it, what he said was that I played sports that were physically, you know, I can push people, I can, you know, that's where he expressed his anger. In football, I can just push people, hit people. In basketball, I can bump people, knock them over. You know, that's where he expressed himself. And then there was nothing else. The teachers didn't pay attention, so some of them were just kind of moved along. And so as they went into high school, they were eventually either forced to drop out because of them being labeled, or they were expelled. And so what happened then is they spent their time in the streets. Eventually they get in trouble. And if they're still juveniles, they're ending up in our juvenile detention facilities here on the nation. We built 2 very large facilities, one in Tuba City that could house 46, and here in Chinle, 48. So that's the kind of message that we were sending to our children, that, you know, we're building these facilities. And recently there was the Yazzie Martinez case in the state of New Mexico. And the reason that the suit was filed is really the same thing. Our children are not getting the attention, the support services that they need in education to succeed. And so this is why the case went to court, and the case was won. There was a corrective action put into play, and we hear about the BIE schools, the grant schools. Many times they're under corrective actions. Oftentimes they do some of it. Some schools do it. The family has refiled again because the state of New Mexico had not been following the corrective action plan. And so when I ask these prisoners, what would you say to me as a tribal leader, as an influential community member, and if I was a teacher, what should I do? What could I have done to prevent you from being here? Well, they said, when I was falling behind in my math, I would have loved to have my teacher sit with me, work through the problem, and show me step by step. And he says, that's going on here in the prison. I have a teacher that sits with me, helps me through the problems. I go home or to his room, he called it home, from the classroom across the walkway, that's where home was. And he says, I have a chapter to read in philosophy. 2 days later, my teacher comes back. I have an opportunity to talk about what I read. I have an opportunity to have my teacher tell me their interpretation of what that chapter was. I get an opportunity to talk about, my reading. It makes me feel good, and I'm learning. The other thing that was really interesting was that there was an elder also there in the prison. He started teaching a lot of these young men that are there. He's taught them to speak about their clan. He's taught them about the basics, ceremony, how to pray. He says, I never knew how to pray until I came here to prison. That's what I would like to see in the school system. As a young child, we talk about, being able to talk about what's going on at home. Maybe bring my parents, and they have such thing as what they said, peacemaking. Maybe if they would have spent that time with us and my family at a young age, they had a lot of time to sit back and think. And these were the things that came out either in individual sessions or in the group sessions. And so I said, if you were to come back into your community, how would you help? What would you say to the young Navajo just now in elementary school or starting? And they said, I would talk to them about my experience. I would talk to them about what I'm learning. And he even offered, he says, I can come in and help you. I would love to help my people by telling them what they're doing is wrong. They shouldn't be here. And I thought it was really moving that that they were able to tell me that. And I've been thinking about this. What can I do? Because I know we can't bring prisoners into the school system. We can't bring them into the juvenile facilities where they could actually talk. Because some of the things that I would learn in my professional career is that the very people who have gone and experienced substance abuse, gang activity, whatever it is, whatever they got in trouble with, can speak to it and be able to connect with young people. And so I haven't figured out how I'm going to do it, but I think the closest is maybe taking a camera in there and videotaping and then bringing that back and use it as a teaching mechanism. But again, school discipline, a pipeline to prison. Can you imagine? I've been telling my boss, Director Jesse Delmar, that recently there was an MOA signed with, I think, the Central Consolidated Schools. And one of the things I learned as I went through my research was that when a school has a resource officer, a police officer, there is a higher chance of our children ending up in detention, and then eventually graduating to adult jail, eventually graduating to the state system, and then finally the federal prison. And I tied this also to foster care. I spent a good number of my years as a social worker. We have to do better there as well. Because, one of the people ask me, why did you leave? You went to school, you have a master's degree in social work, why did you go where you're at? I left because we just were doing such a poor job with our children when they went to foster care. And I did a kind of a round table with judges a few years back when they have their conference. Each year they have their annual conference, and I spoke to them in Albuquerque, and one of the things I told them is that we have to do better in our child welfare services, because we're putting children in foster care. We're doing nothing to help the parents so that the child can go home to a healthy environment. And we're doing the same thing with our adults too. When they come back from prison, they're going back into the same environment. We have to find a way to fix that. And so why do I bring this out in educational form? Well, I think unless we do better in the educational system, the statistics are going to grow. And if you notice, if you travel across the nation, we have brand new justice centers. Included in those justice centers are correctional facilities. We should be building institutions where we're educating our children to be productive citizens, to be able to, like Manali said, PhDs, making professional people that will come out and teach our children with the energy. And these guys sitting in prison, they have a lot of energy, they have a lot of time to think about what's wrong. And I sure hate to see any more of our children there. So unless we improve our educational system, I think our population statistics are going to grow. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Monty Russell. This is the second one of these that I've gone to, and I was quiet at the other one. But this is something that's really near and dear to my heart, as well as what my father and my mother spent a lifetime trying to achieve, and they weren't able to get to this place. I think one of the things that I just want to try to hit on a couple items that I think have been possibly forgotten. But I think one of the things that's important, and we're sitting in a building and on a campus, that was created 50 years ago. And when they started to think about Dcollege, at that time Navajo Community College, what they heard, what Dylan Platero, what Alan Yazzie, what Ned Hatothli, what these leaders, Raymond Nake, what they heard was, no, you Navajos aren't ready. More or less saying you're not smart enough. But what's really sad about that is that 51 years ago, that was white people saying that. And today, It's our Navajo people. Our Navajo people are telling to our young doctorates, our teachers, our counselors, you're not ready. We've come so far to actually fall further behind. And it's sad. And it's sad. You know, I have behind me a student from Dcollege. And I asked, what are you doing here? And she's at the dorm. She actually is an intern within our school. Because I want to listen. And so we talk about people like that and people that have actually already gone through and earned their degrees and became doctors and became teachers. And now we're at this place which I think allows us and affords us to go beyond what former Vice President Rex said. And I will challenge one thing that Rexley Jim said. The standard of success is not graduating from Stanford or Princeton. And we've got to stop using that as the standard of success. It's having our people come back. It doesn't matter that Mr. Jim went to Princeton. He came back and he served. It doesn't matter that Dr. Gray Eyes went to University of Chicago and Stanford. They came back and they're helping. That's the model of success that we want to have. That's the model of success when we talk about why are we doing this? Why are we trying to achieve this idea of not taking control as if, you know, we do this, you do that, and sitting there commanding. But so that everybody's voice is heard, and that's part of this process of this public hearing, is to hear the voices of people. What are the concerns? I think that's important to make sure, because the idea is then to take what we're talking about. Let's create a real Navajo school system, and we start with the BIE. And so when we talk about discipline, we talk about peacemaking. When we talk about human resources, or we talk about accountability, let's use accountability. We hear it a lot from ESSA, before that, No Child Left Behind. What's our accountability system? We've been doing it a lot longer than the ESEA, Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It's called It's our clanship. It's our responsibility and our relationships to each other. That's our accountability plan. How do we integrate that into the school system? We can't do that if we're always looking to Washington. Part of this idea is that we no longer look out for our solutions, but we look within. We look at the experience that we have just in this room. You know, my boss, President Bigman, has worked on big multi-million-dollar investment deals. How does that help, you know, young people today? What can they do to come back and try to help their communities? That's what we have to do, is find the relevance of education, because right now our students do not see that relevance, and I think that's what we're looking at. But the other part is one of the questions, okay, let's say Doty's not ready. But this process, like Dr. Gray Eyes talked about, you start and then you build capacity. You don't take it over right away. Think of a child. They learn to crawl. Then they take one step and they grab. Then they take two, and pretty soon they're walking, pretty soon they're running. Why do we expect Doty to, out of the gate, sprint? Nobody else has asked that. We build a capacity that we need as we move forward. And I think one area that wasn't touched on that I think is really important is the school facilities. This provides an opportunity. A lot of you from grant schools know that there were 10 schools that were on a list, right? 7 of those 10 schools were Navajo. How many got funded?
3.
None. No Navajo schools got funded. All the other schools got funded. Why? Because every Navajo school fought against each other. Look, Chukai tried to push Greasewood out of the way, and Crystal tried to push Zitnahotithli out of the way. And while we're pushing each other and elbowing, what happened? 3 other schools got funded. If the Navajo Nation came together and went to Congress and went to the Department of Interior and said, this is our list, you give us that money, Navajo would have been one of those schools. But we have to stop fighting with each other. Stop pushing each other around. Whether we believe in the tribal government or not, it's ours. It's our aunts, it's our uncles, it's our kids, it's our parents, it's us. Who are we going to put faith in? Outside? Think about what we're saying. We go with Navajo, or we want to believe in the federal government. That's the choices. Think about what those leaders from a long time ago would say. You mean I fought so hard? When Raymond Nakai sat here and said to everybody, we are going to start a college, and they laughed at him, and he said, I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you what we're going to do. And today, we're asking for permission. The idea of tribal sovereignty, the idea of self-determination that Dr. Gray Isaacs, discussed, we need to practice it. And we're not going to do perfect. There will be some mistakes. But as long as we're moving forward, when a child doesn't do well in a class, as we heard from different places, the support. When a child doesn't do well, there's support. That to me is what is really important about this idea. There's support in the classroom for the student. There's support in the classroom for the teacher. There's support at the school level for the administrators. There's support for the school board members. There's support for the Board of Education. There's support for the HES committee. At every level, you provide that support. That's what we're talking about here, and that support comes from within, not without. And so I just want to say that, I say this as Mr. Jim said, as a grandparent. I say this as a former grant school administrator. I say this as a former BIE director. I say it now as a president of a college, where 83% of our freshmen need remedial classes. 83%. And they have to take that class 3 times. 3 times. We don't push them out the door. That's not our way. That's not the grant school way. But we have to do something to get them better prepared for college. That's what we're talking about. Whatever that success is, we heard about it might be, CTE and things like that. The other thing that I think would be interesting here is that there are 66 schools. You could have one school become, and this is, Rex and myself have talked about this for many years, it could become the Navajo Juilliard. And you could have another school say it's going to be a STEM magnet school. And you could have another school focus on vocational education. If you control and oversee the entire school system, you now can start meeting the needs of every student on this reservation. And we stop fighting with each other. And we say, my child wants to become a silversmith. Well, that school at Rough Rock has that. My school wants to become a scientist. Well, let's go over to Zithnah for an elementary program and then a high school. You begin to start thinking, what are those possibilities? And I think that's the first step here, is that we can start to think, what's possible? What's probable? And I think anything is possible. And we have the ability to make it all probable. Thank you.
I'm Yate Miranda Haskey, and I've sent my children to private school. And for those educators in the room, it's much like that movie Waiting for Superman, in which we drive by 7, I lost count, beyond the number of schools we drive by daily just to get my children to a college prep school.
to prepare them for college, much like what Mr. Rex Redhair was talking about. Which school is the best one to send my children to prepare them to be contributing citizens in the 21st century. And for me, what I think that would best prepare them is college education. And so in teaching all these years I've been here at the college, I've developed or assessed informally some of the best schools that we have on Navajo, and based on that, made those decisions. I believe that our students are ready. They're ready for college. They are spinning their wheels in our high schools. And this is where concurrent enrollment in college comes into play. They're ready for that. They're hungry for that. And we can prepare them and help them get ready and address these remedial educational needs in reading, writing, and math. And we've got 2 tribal colleges here in our nation that can fulfill that need. I also agree with the idea that instead of trying to take all 60+ schools to become the best school that they can be, but rather approach it from, if we're going to think out of the box and dream up ideas on how to do this, I would think we develop model schools, a model early childhood education center or Head Start, that a model school in STEM, like Dr. Russell was saying. All of these that we then, as parents, have choices to send our children to develop whatever those skills are, including Navajo language and Navajo culture. The Nebizad. I'm still waiting for that. What is taking so long to get there? My oldest is 26 years old. I've been hunting for a Navajo immersion school to help my children become fluent in Nebizad. And we just got tired of waiting. But in the history of Navajo education, we've had some exemplary schools, including Rock Point Community School, which has a proven track record about producing bilingual, educated, successful Navajo citizens who can compete with other Americans effectively and return and contribute to the Navajo Nation. And so that's certainly a need that we have for one of our schools, and hopefully, as you consider this, that be addressed. And in light of the language shift and the idea of reversing language shift, we need to have schools that also address that loss of language of parents who didn't grow up fluent in it. And how do we formulate schools and immersion that address families who come together collectively to learn in a school that's going to revitalize that Navajo language and culture. And one of the other aspects in choosing a school for my children, values were important. Values matter. Values transfer to the workplace as well in our connection with other people and how we work with them. Real simple things, values like trust, care, responsibility, how we interact, and many of these are inherent in our Diné values. And it's a matter of returning to these, the elders in our communities, in our homes, getting away from this fostered dependency imposed by federal paternalism that's taught us to look outside of ourselves for resolution to the problems that we experience when rather many of the resources we have are here within our own nation. And I say we're ready. I say, let's go for it. Let's do it. What are we waiting for? I mean, if the genesis of this idea was in the 70s, this is almost 50 years in the making. Let's just do it. Get beyond asking for permission and just do it. And there will be stumbling blocks along the way. But in the process, if we start small and we develop effectiveness in those specialties of schools And those then become model schools that become training ground for teachers that we then certify if we want the best ECE educators, this is the school, the model school that we go to that can teach that. If we want the best Navajo language instruction in our school, this is the training ground at that school for that. And then we formulate what those certifications are going to be, etc. I mean, we're ready to do this. The amount of expertise and knowledge that we have within the nation, it's here. And it's a matter of just making it happen. We're ready to do this. And so with that, I support it. Yeah.
I wanted to add that you have a really good survey, and I've attended so far 2 public hearings, and it's probably one of the best discussions. Very positive, and I thank everyone for that. I think that our children, we're always being told, you don't include us as a youth. Let's include them by sending them the survey. We know that there's a large population at NAU, ASU, UNM. Send them out and see what they have to offer. Thank you.
Yeah, Nana, I really like the way Ms. Haskey, your comment was made. We look at the charter schools and the private schools. They focus on certain parts. When they focus on certain, like the Montessori schools, they only focus on what that curriculum is, and they limit that. And yet, parents pay $10,000 a year to send their kids there. They don't send them to the public schools. So if we build that elite school system in each of these, as Dr. Russell brought out, we can have elite schools. If we have those strands across Navajo land, we could be that much richer in our history. And right now, the school system that we have is failing us, and we're losing our youth rapidly.
Yeah, my name is Nanaba Salmon. I work here at Dcollege, and I was actually debating if I wanted to come to this tonight, and I remembered that we were actually having a discussion about BIE and DOTI just the other day, and as I was getting ready to take one of my finals. I'm also a student at the University of New Mexico, so sitting here tonight listening to this, I keep asking myself, you know, what are we waiting for? You know, this has been a long time coming, and Dr. Russell made a comment earlier, and it took me back to a time when I was visiting in New Zealand and being an ambassador with the Americans for Indian Opportunity. I had the pleasure of being able to travel down there and visit some of the immersion schools as well as the tribal colleges down there, and also meeting with different members of their parliament. And I remember at one point in time, one of their members of parliament said that it's easier to say I'm sorry or apologize rather than to ask for permission. And we're sitting here and we're going round and round about, you know, is this something that we should do? Is this something that we should think about for our kids? Number one, Dcollege is already doing it. They've been doing it. And that's one of the things that brought me home when I made the decision to move home. and then coming here to Dcollege and being able to work here, you know, it really is a blessing to be able to come back and work for your nation. Like, you know, Rexley, Jim, and many others who have left the nation to get that education and come back and really give back to the people in that sense. And so I'm sitting here and I'm listening about it, and then at the same time, you know, it's funny because you hear the word decolonization used a lot among universities, among academia, you know, and one thing that I keep coming back to is it's happening already. All we need to do is push it and move forward with it so that our students become stronger in their identity, because once they identify who they are themselves as Navajo students, that alone will push them even further along in their academics and making better decisions. And, you know, coming back to culturally relevant teachings, you know, it's here, it's happening. So I really do hope that, you know, it doesn't continue to stay a question of do we do it or not, but let's get it done, let's move forward, let's make it happen for our kids and our grandkids down the road. I think those are the thoughts that we should be thinking of tonight. Thank you.
So with that, I'm going to close and say thank you and travel safe home.